Will Smith slapped Chris Rock live in front of millions of people. But what no one saw that night were the faces of his children. Jaden, frozen in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. Willow, her hands trembling over her phone as notifications exploded nonstop. Trey, the forgotten son, watching from his home miles away, feeling once again that familiar family void he's known since he was 2 years old. That slap wasn't just aimed at Chris Rock. It was the public collapse of a family that had been falling apart in private for decades. This is the story Hollywood doesn't want you to know. Private conversations that were never meant to see the light of day. A devastating letter Trey wrote but never sent. A personal diary that was violated, destroying trust forever. Stay until the very last second, because what comes next will completely change the way you see this family. Let's go back to 1992. Trey Smith is barely 2 years old when his world splits in half. He's sitting on the floor of an empty living room, surrounded by moving boxes. His mother, Cherise Empino, is crying in the kitchen as she packs plates with shaking hands. Outside, a moving truck waits with the engine running. Will Smith had just met Jada Pinkett on the set of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The chemistry was instant, magnetic. Jada was 21, beautiful, ambitious, intense. The divorce papers were signed in January 1995. There's a photo from that day that very few people have seen. Cherie is holding Trey in her arms outside the courthouse. He's 3 years old, staring straight into the camera with huge, confused eyes, searching for something that clearly isn't there. Will isn't in the photo. He sent his lawyers to sign for him. Every night before bed, Trey would ask, "When is Daddy coming?" How do you explain to a 3-year-old that Daddy is building a new family? That soon there will be other children filling the place that should be only yours? Will married Jado on December 31st, 1997. A private, intimate wedding, elegant clothes, expensive champagne, radiant smiles perfectly suited for cameras. But there's something deeply unsettling in the official photos. Trey isn't in a single important one. He was 5 years old, Will's only child at the time, and he wasn't invited to his father's wedding. Years later, Jada would explain it with chilling casualness. It was an intimate ceremony, just for the two of us. But Trey was a 5-year-old boy who learned a brutal lesson that day. In Daddy's new perfect family, he wasn't important enough. Weekends with Will were strange and tense. Trey would arrive at a massive mansion where everything gleamed with opulence. Jada would greet him politely, but never with the warm, comforting affection of someone who truly cares. "Hi, Trey. How are you? How's school?" The right words, zero human warmth. And worst of all, for years, Trey called his stepmother Mrs. Jada, like she was the school principal. Then Jaden was born on July 8th, and after that, Willow on October 31st, 2000. 2 new children, bright and adored, living full-time with Dad, having breakfast with him every morning, knowing his routines, his private jokes, his comfortable silences. Trey, at 8 years old, visited only on weekends and was practically a ghost. Jaden got the latest tech toy. Willow soaked up all the attention, and Trey smiled politely from the corner of the couch. But 8-year-olds shouldn't have to understand any of this. There's a detail from 2003 that will break your heart. When Trey was 11, he did a drawing at school. The teacher asked the students to draw their family doing something they enjoyed together. Trey drew 3 people: himself, his mom Cherie with a smile, and an empty space where Dad should clearly be. But he didn't leave it completely blank. He drew a shadow, a dark, blurry silhouette, like a ghost. When the teacher asked who that figure was, Trey answered, "That's my dad, but I don't know how to draw him very well because I hardly ever really see him." That drawing still exists. Cherie kept it in a shoebox. She never showed it to Will. In 2008, Trey was 16, the age when you need your father the most. Will was in Australia filming. Jaden was with him, living the father-son adventure. Trey was in Los Angeles taking public buses, painfully invisible to his famous father. One day, Trey posted something short on Facebook. "Sometimes being the forgotten son hurts more than just not having a father." He deleted it 10 minutes later, but someone captured it. But there's more. Something almost no one knows. There's an audio recording of a conversation between Trey and his mother from 2011. It was recorded by accident. The recording lasts 23 minutes. It was never released. In that heartbreaking audio, Trey is crying, a 19-year-old sobbing like a small child, and he says something devastating. "Mom, I went to the big house for Willow's birthday. There were like 50 people there, professional photographers. And when I arrived, Dad hugged me tightly in front of all the cameras. But when the cameras turned off, he just walked away from me like I was a stranger. He didn't even ask how I was really doing. I just stood there like an idiot, waiting for him to see me. But he never did, Mom. He never does." Remember that recording? We'll come back to it. Let's fast forward to 2013. Trey is 21. It's Father's Day. Instagram is flooded with emotional photos, but Trey posts something different. A photo of himself completely alone with a caption that cuts like a knife. "Happy Father's Day to all the fathers who are truly present in their children's lives." The word present was a direct stab to the heart. The world understood immediately. Social media exploded. Trey Smith had just publicly destroyed Will Smith. 3 weeks later, Will posted a video crying, "I've made terrible mistakes as a father. Trey is my firstborn, and I failed him completely. I left him behind while I was building my career, and there's no excuse for that." The video went viral, but there was something performative about that perfectly framed crying. Will Smith knows how to make big public gestures that move the masses. What he never learned was how to be present in the small, boring moments. Trey responded publicly with grace. "I love my father. We all make mistakes. We're healing together." Perfect words for the cameras. But people who knew Trey knew the truth. He was still shattered inside. But here's what no one has ever told you. There is a letter, a handwritten letter Trey wrote in 2014. A letter addressed to Will that was never sent. He wrote it in blue ballpoint pen on plain white paper. A close friend revealed devastating excerpts. "Dad, I'm 22 years old, and I still don't really know who you are as a person. I know who you are to the world, but I don't know what makes you laugh when there are no cameras. I don't know how you smell in the morning. I don't know what you eat for breakfast. I don't know if you snore. I don't know anything about you that actually matters to a son. When I turned 16, I waited for your call all day. It came at 11:47 p.m. You said, 'Happy birthday, son,' in a rushed voice and hung up in less than 2 minutes. Jaden turned 16 months later. I saw all the photos, the huge party, the gifts, you at the center hugging him, crying tears of pride. Why did he deserve all your time? Forgiving you has been the hardest thing I've ever done, because forgiving you means accepting that I will never have the father I needed. It means burying the perfect dad I imagined when I was 5 and drawing your shadow. It means moving forward carrying a permanent hole shaped exactly like you." Trey never sent that letter. He put it in a drawer, and it's still there, yellowed, stained with dried tears. If this story is hitting you, consider subscribing. Because what comes next about Jaden and Willow is even more disturbing. Always be interesting. Always be memorable. That was the rule. A 12-year-old receiving business coaching as if he were a CEO. Then Twitter happened. At 14, Jaden began posting abstract philosophical thoughts, quotes that went viral, but not for the reasons he expected. How can mirrors be real if our eyes aren't real? The internet exploded. Brutal memes, merciless mockery. For months, Jaden became Twitter's favorite joke, and no one stopped to think, this is a 14-year-old child, a child who grew up completely isolated with no reference point for how the real world works. No friends to tell him, "Bro, that doesn't make sense." Jaden was raised by parents who celebrated every word as profound, who convinced him he was special, smarter than his peers. And when the world brutally showed him that he wasn't, Jaden had no tools to process that mass rejection, so he retreated into extreme fashion. Long skirts, feminine clothing, and Will and Jada celebrated it publicly. We're proud of Jaden for challenging gender norms. But think about it. Was that really his authentic self, or was he just playing yet another role? The misunderstood artist, the rebel challenging the system, because Jaden never learned how to just be Jaden. Then came the physical collapse in 2018. The photos are genuinely disturbing. Jaden at 20 years old, almost unrecognizable. Sharp cheekbones, sunken cheeks, glassy eyes, and a face that looked dangerously thin. He looked like he was slowly dying in front of the cameras. Will and Jada reacted publicly on Red Table Talk, admitting they were deeply concerned about Jaden's extreme vegan diet and severe nutritional deficiencies. But even that confession was performative. It happened on camera on their show for viral content, and no one asked the obvious question: why was a young man with access to every resource starving himself? The answer is simple: desperate control. When you feel like you have no control over anything in your life, controlling food becomes the one thing that is truly yours, even if it's killing you. Jaden, raised in a family where he never had real power over his own life, found power in refusing food, in making himself smaller, in slowly disappearing. He eventually regained weight. But the question remains: who is Jaden Smith really? Is there an authentic Jaden beneath all those layers? Even he doesn't seem to know. In recent interviews, Jaden says, "It was unique, it was a blessing." But his body language tells a different story. He shifts nervously, avoids eye contact, smiles too quickly, as if he's performing even then. Now ask yourself this: what part of your own life are you living for other people? When was the last time you did something purely because you wanted to? But before we continue, you need to know about the diary. When Jaden was 13 in 2011, Will gave him a diary, a beautiful notebook made of Italian leather with the initials JCS embossed in gold. "So you can write all your deepest thoughts," Will said proudly. It was well-intentioned, and Jaden was genuinely excited. Finally, he had a private space, a place where he could be honest without consequences. He used that diary religiously for months. He wrote about his deepest fears, about feeling inadequate, about the pressure of being Will Smith's son, about the internet ridicule. Page after page of a teenager trying to understand himself. One day in 2012, Jaden forgot the diary in the living room. He left it on the couch. He had to rush out. The diary stayed there, exposed and vulnerable. Jada found it that afternoon. She saw the notebook, recognized the initials, and felt curiosity. Any mother feels curiosity about her teenage child, but most mothers who truly respect their children resist that temptation. Jada didn't resist for a second. She opened the diary deliberately and read page after page, every vulnerable secret, every exposed fear. That night at dinner, Jada made a casual comment. "Jaden, are you still so worried about what people think of your tweets?" Jaden froze instantly. He had never spoken to his mother about that fear. He had only written it in his private diary. His eyes widened with horrible understanding. He looked at Jada and knew exactly what she had done. "Did you read my diary?" he asked, his voice shaking. Jada didn't deny it. "You're my son. You shouldn't have secrets from me. Family is built on radical transparency. But transparency must be voluntary. Forced transparency isn't transparency. It's violation." Will was sitting there, a silent witness. He said nothing in defense of his son because Will never confronts Jada. Jaden got up from the table without a word, went to his room, and never wrote in that diary again. The following pages are completely blank, empty. That diary is still somewhere in Jaden's room today, a monument to betrayal, a reminder that in the Smith family, nothing is private. Everything can and will be used. And that violation explains everything about Jaden's behavior. It explains why his posts are so cryptic, why he's never honest in interviews, why he built layers of protective personas. Because he learned that real vulnerability makes you vulnerable to being hurt. And in his family, vulnerability is exploited. October 31st, 2000, Halloween. Willow Camille Rain Smith is born in Los Angeles. The perfect baby, the adored princess. But Willow wouldn't be a traditional princess. She would be another experiment. Another chance for Will and Jada to prove their philosophy worked. Willow never had a normal childhood. At 3, she was already on film sets. At 5, she wasn't playing with ordinary dolls. At 7, she no longer dreamed of being a dancer. Her dreams were being rewritten by her famous parents' dreams. And then, at 9 years old, the unforgivable happened. "Whip My Hair," a song designed to turn a 9-year-old girl into an instant global superstar. The song went viral. Primetime TV performances, interviews where Willow, with a child's voice, had to speak like a seasoned professional. She was 9 years old. She shouldn't have been managing fame. She should have been learning how to ride a bike, playing with friends, making mistakes without the world watching. The promotional tour was brutal. City after city, endless rehearsals. Makeup artists waking her at 5 in the morning. Choreographers shouting, "Again! Again!" until her legs shook from exhaustion. And Willow smiled, because mom and dad had invested so much, and you don't disappoint Will Smith. But something was breaking violently inside her. That feeling of being trapped in a life you didn't choose, of being a product instead of a person. Nights were the worst. After concerts, Willow was alone in identical hotel rooms. Years later, she would describe those nights. I would sit on the bed and look at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, and I didn't recognize the girl staring back at me. She had my face, my eyes, my hair, but she wasn't me. She was someone my parents had created. Then at 10 years old, Willow made a radical decision. She shaved her head completely without telling anyone. She took a razor and systematically removed every curl that had made her famous, every lock that had been photographed, admired, monetized. The sound of the clippers must have been deafening. Lock after lock falling, a 10-year-old girl destroying the image built for her. A silent scream no one wanted to hear. The photos are heartbreaking. A child with a shaved head, defiant but empty eyes, clenched jaw, and something screaming, "I can't do this anymore." Jada found Willow like that, and her reaction wasn't maternal concern. It was corporate panic. "What did you do? Do you have any idea how many appearances we have scheduled? How are we going to explain this to the sponsors?" Willow didn't answer. She just looked at her mother with those huge eyes, and in that silence was a message. "I don't care about your tour. This body is mine." Years later, Willow explained it herself. "I felt like I had no control over anything in my life. Every decision was made by someone else. Where to go, what to sing, what to wear. Shaving my head was the only way to take back some power. It was pure desperation." Jada cried as Willow spoke. But even those tears felt calculated, because they were on camera, because it was viral content for Red Table Talk. Will and Jada canceled the tour. There was a statement about supporting Willow's creative autonomy, but there was no real apology. "No, we were wrong to push our 9-year-old daughter into fame, and the damage was already done. Because when you're 10 years old and your only act of autonomy is symbolic self-destruction, you learn something terrifying. That only by hurting yourself do you get heard. And that lesson doesn't disappear. The scars on Willow's arms are real. Small white lines she tries to hide with bracelets on the inside of her left forearm. Parallel marks. Permanent testimony of a child who couldn't find any other way out. Will wasn't present during that recording. Later, he posted an Instagram message about unconditional love and pride. But he never sat in front of a camera and said, "I failed. I pushed my 9-year-old daughter into fame, and I broke her." Because admitting that would mean admitting his parenting philosophy was a disaster. And Will Smith does not admit disasters. What Willow described is classic childhood trauma. When your childhood is stolen, when you're forced to grow up too fast, your body becomes the last private space you own. Hurting yourself becomes a twisted way of reclaiming ownership over yourself. In 2021, Willow released an album called "Lately I Feel Everything." The lyrics are brutally honest. One song contains this devastating line, "I can't be what you want me to be. I'm too broken to be your dream. I've been pretending to be someone, but I don't know who I'm supposed to be." A 21-year-old admitting she doesn't know who she is, that her entire personality has been a performance, that beneath the character, she's not even sure there's a real person left. And all this family fracture, all this pain accumulated over decades, was about to explode in the most public and humiliating way possible. When it did, the entire world would finally see the cracks this family had hidden for years. To understand the Oscar slap, you need to know the secret that explains everything. Will and Jada have been in a dead marriage for years. They haven't slept together since 2016. They live in separate houses, but maintain the facade, because divorce would mean admitting failure. Then came August, a young singer and a friend of Jaden. Jada, at 42, began a relationship with him. August was 23. In 2020, August spoke publicly. Will and Jada then staged that infamous episode of Red Table Talk. Jada, with a broken Will sitting beside her, called the relationship an entanglement. Will tried to laugh, but his face told another story. Dead eyes. Empty. the face of a man publicly humiliated. For Jaden and Willow, that revelation was a nuclear bomb. August was someone close to them. Their mother had betrayed that trust in the most grotesque way. There is a third recording captured in 2020 during the pandemic. An employee was recording a voice memo and forgot to stop it when Will and Jada started talking. The phone captured fragments. Jada, Willow asked if she could take a year off. Just rest. Will, for what? To do what? Jada, nothing. Just be. She says she's tired. Will, she's 20 years old. She can't be tired. Silence. Jada, maybe we pushed them too hard. Will, we prepared them. They're in therapy. They're fine. Jada, and Trey? Long silence. Will, Trey made his choice. He chose to be normal. As if being normal were a failure. That sentence reveals everything about how Will sees his children, as extensions of his ego, as projects meant to validate his greatness. And Trey, by choosing a quiet life, had failed that mission. March 27, 2022. Oscar night. Chris Rock steps on stage and makes a joke about Jada. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. A reference to her shaved head. Jada suffers from alopecia. The joke is cruel, unnecessary. Will laughs at first. Then he looks at Jada, sees her face, that expression of humiliation, and something inside him snaps. He stands up, walks onto the stage in front of millions. The sound echoes. Chris Rock, stunned. Wow, Will Smith just slapped the hell out of me. Will walks back to his seat shouting, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." The silence is absolute. That slap wasn't about honor. It was desperation. A man trying to prove he still mattered, that he could still protect, that he still had power. Because privately, Will had lost all control. His marriage was a lie. His children were broken. Trey had emotionally rejected him. Jaden was lost. Willow was shattered. And Jada had humiliated him with August. 30 minutes later, Will won the Oscar. He went on stage crying, giving a speech about protecting your family and being a vessel of love. But it wasn't love. It was wounded ego. It was the collapse of a man whose facade had finally fallen apart. And his children watched from their seats, feeling shame, sadness, and something close to understanding. Because they knew that pressure. They had lived under that impossible weight. In 2023, Jada published a book. She revealed that she and Will had been separated since 2016. 7 years of lying to the public. 7 years of pretending a dead marriage was alive. Will found out at the same time as everyone else. There was no prior conversation. Jada simply published the secrets for commercial benefit. Jaden reacted by saying, "Families are complicated." Willow said nothing. But in 2024, she canceled a scheduled appearance on Red Table Talk. She simply didn't show up. She set a boundary. Let's go back to Jaden's diary. On the last pages, there's an entry from May 2012. "Sometimes I feel like my entire family is acting as characters in a play that never ends. Dad acts like the perfect father. Mom acts like the enlightened mother. I act like the special son. And Trey doesn't act anymore. That's why Dad doesn't know what to do with him. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if we all stopped acting. Would we recognize each other?" That entry explains everything. Today, Jaden is 27. He talks about therapy, about boundaries, but he's still lost. Willow is 24. She said, "I spent years trying to be who my parents wanted me to be, and when I rebelled, I realized I didn't even know who I was." Trey is 33. He lives a quiet, private life. Breaking cycles is the real work. You just have to be present. Will is 56. He confessed his greatest fear was being forgotten, and yet he forgot his children. Jada is 53. She keeps talking about healing, but there's an emptiness in her words. So do Will and Jada really love their children? Yes, but in the wrong way. Will loves them as trophies, as validations of his greatness, not as children who need unconditional love without expectations. Jada loves them as concepts, as extensions of her theories about revolutionary parenting, not with protective boundaries, respected privacy, and emotional safety. And that kind of conditional love is deeply damaging, because it destroys a child's ability to feel worthy simply for existing. This isn't just the story of Will Smith's children. It's the story of thousands of families where parents destroy their children with impossible expectations. The Smith kids had everything, every material advantage, every resource, but they didn't have the one thing they truly needed. Parents who loved them for existing, not for achieving. They didn't need a mansion. They needed a home. They didn't need fame. They needed family. They didn't need unlimited freedom. They needed safe boundaries. And that's the one thing they never received. Will Smith's children are survivors. Survivors of parents who loved them the wrong way. Survivors of impossible expectations. Will Smith conquered the world, won every award, accumulated immense wealth, but he failed as a father. Not out of malice, but out of ego. And his children will carry that cost for the rest of their lives, working in therapy to undo damage that never should have existed. Trying to discover who they are, breaking cycles. That is the real tragedy. Not the slap, not the scandal, not the strange tweets. The real tragedy is three children who deserve to be loved simply for existing, but were only loved when they achieved. Three children who needed present parents, but only had famous ones. Did this story impact you? Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Do you know someone who grew up under similar pressure? Have you ever felt like you had to achieve something to be loved? What other famous families are hiding similar tragedies? That answer is waiting in the next one.